My name is Diane Walker, and the story I'm about to tell begins on a warm Saturday afternoon in Lincoln Springs, Montana, the quiet American town I call home. Lincoln Springs is the kind of place where the sky feels too big for the land beneath it, where every sunset settles over the hills like a soft blanket. I love the calm here, maybe because my life hasn't always been calm. But on that day, I wasn't thinking about peace or comfort. I was thinking about my brother's wedding and how I hoped, more than anything, that we might have one day without tension. I should have known better. The wedding was held at Ridgewood Estate, an old countryside house that looked like it had been flown straight out of Europe and dropped gently onto American soil. The building was stone, thick and timeless, with climbing roses that tangled around iron balconies. The windows were tall, wide open, and spilling warm light across the garden. As I walked up the long gravel path, I could hear the sounds of guests laughing, glasses clinking, and music drifting from a violinist under a white canopy. For a moment, I let myself believe the day would be beautiful. I wore a soft blue dress I bought for $140, simple but elegant enough for the occasion. I had tied my hair back loosely, letting a few strands fall around my face. I remember checking myself in the mirror before I left home, telling my reflection, "Just smile, Diane. Today is about family." I never imagined those words would turn into something painful. I never imagined that I would walk into a moment that would change everything between my brother and me. As I stepped into the garden, I saw Caleb, my older brother, standing near the flower arch. He looked handsome in a charcoal gray suit, his blonde hair combed perfectly to the side. His bride-to-be, Marissa Bennett, stood beside him, glowing in a cream-colored dress that shimmered when she moved. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, were smiling proudly. Everyone seemed happy, warm, full of promise. I truly wished the best for them. But then Caleb saw me. He lifted his arm and pointed straight at me, almost like he was presenting something amusing to a crowd. "This is my sister, Diane," he said loudly, loud enough for the people around him to turn their heads in my direction. That part didn't hurt me. It was what came next that sliced through me like a cold blade. "Well," he added with a laugh, "not my real sister. She's an illegitimate child. We adopted her." I froze. The world seemed to stop for a full second, then rush forward too quickly. A few of the guests laughed along with him, as if I were a joke they all understood. Someone even whispered something to another guest, and they both snickered. Heat rose to my cheeks, not the pleasant kind, but the kind that stings like a burn. My legs felt weak. My hands trembled. I had walked in expecting kindness. Instead, I had been slapped with shame. I didn't know where to look. My eyes darted from Caleb's smirk to the flowers on the arch to the ground beneath my shoes. My throat tightened. I swallowed hard and tried to stay steady, but I felt like a child again, small, unwanted, and out of place. But before I could say anything, before I could even decide whether to walk away or stand there, something unexpected happened. Marissa stepped forward so quickly her dress swished sharply around her ankles. Her expression had changed completely. Just moments earlier, she had been the picture of calm joy, but now her face burned red, her jaw tight with anger. "What did you just say?" she snapped, turning on Caleb as if he had betrayed every value she believed in. Her voice wasn't loud at first, but sharp enough to silence the laughter around her. "Caleb, are you out of your mind?" He blinked at her, confused. "What?" "It's just a joke." "A joke," she repeated, her voice rising. "You think humiliating your own sister is funny? You think calling her illegitimate is something to laugh about?" She glanced back at me, her eyes softening for a moment before turning fiery again. "This marriage won't happen. How dare you speak like that? You could have dropped a pin and heard it hit the ground." Guests stopped talking. The violinist lowered her bow. Someone gasped. Even the breeze seemed to pause in the air. Caleb stared at her, stunned, like he had been slapped. "Marissa, what are you talking about? You're ending the wedding because of her." He said her like I was a problem, like I had stepped into his life only to ruin it. Marissa didn't even look at him. She stared at the garden floor for a moment, pulled the engagement ring off her finger, and placed it firmly in his hand. I'm ending it because of you, she said. You show cruelty without even thinking. And if you can't respect your own sister, you won't respect a wife. All around us, people whispered. Some looked at Caleb in disbelief. Some looked at Marissa as if she had suddenly become the bravest woman they'd ever seen. Others looked at me, and I wasn't sure if it was pity or guilt in their eyes. Maybe both. I didn't speak. I didn't move. My voice was lost somewhere inside me, tangled up with years of hurt I had swallowed quietly. I simply stood there, letting the scene unfold like a story I never asked to be part of. Caleb tried to reach for Marissa's hand, but she stepped back. His voice cracked. Wait, Marissa, you can't do this. Not today. Not like this. I didn't do this, she said calmly, though her eyes were bright with emotion. You did. Then she turned to me again, and her voice softened. Diane, you deserve better than this. You always have. And with that, she walked away, her parents following her with worried faces. Caleb was left standing under the arch, holding a ring and looking like the ground had opened beneath him. And as everyone watched in stunned silence, I realized something very clearly. He had no idea who I truly was. Not as a sister. Not as a woman. Not as a person. And that was where the real story began. After Marissa walked away from the altar, leaving my brother standing alone with his shame, I remember feeling both numb and alert at the same time. It was as if my body had turned to stone, but my mind suddenly woke up after years of silence. People whispered, stared, and shifted uncomfortably, unsure of whether to comfort him or to avoid taking sides. No one came near me, though. Maybe they were afraid I would break down or cry or explode in anger. But I didn't do any of those things. I simply stood there, letting the truth settle in the empty space between us all. Caleb had always seen me as the quiet one, the girl who didn't argue, didn't fight, and didn't interrupt him. I think he believed that meant I was weak or simple or less important. He never asked about my work, never asked how I lived, never asked if I needed anything. In fact, he often made it sound like I was the one depending on him, even though the truth was the complete opposite. It was almost funny, standing there in that expensive garden with all its polished stone fountains and European-style arches, realizing that the people who claimed to know me actually knew nothing at all. What Caleb didn't know, what hardly anyone knew, was that 4 years earlier, my life had taken a very different path. After years of small jobs, saving every dollar and learning everything I could from online courses, I decided to start my own consulting company in a small American city called Portwell, Colorado. I named it Brightleaf Consulting, mostly because I wanted something hopeful, something that reminded me of new beginnings and fresh chances. The name felt like sunlight, and back then, I needed sunlight more than anything. The beginning wasn't easy. I worked out of the smallest rented office you can imagine, just a desk, a lamp, and a second-hand filing cabinet that wobbled when you touched it. There were nights when I sat alone at that little desk until 3 in the morning, writing proposals until my fingers cramped. I ate cereal for dinner more times than I want to admit, choosing cheap food so I could afford to pay for software tools or marketing flyers. I still remember the night when my company earned its first real profit, $3,200 from a medium-sized business in Denver that needed help restructuring its internal systems. I cried when that payment cleared. Not because of the amount, but because it meant the world was finally giving me a chance. My business grew slowly but steadily. I hired my first employee, then a second. And over time, I learned to trust myself in ways I never had before. I didn't brag about it. I didn't announce it to my family. I didn't post about it online. I kept my life private, partly because I liked peace, and partly because my family had a habit of turning anything good into a point of jealousy or comparison.
I didn't want that.
I just wanted to build something real. Ironically, the person who benefited the most from my success was the same brother who humiliated me at his own wedding. 2 years after I started Brightleaf, Caleb lost his job. He had no savings. He never kept money long enough for it to grow. He had debts, unpaid bills, and a small apartment he could barely afford. One night, He came to my house in Lincoln Springs, trembling with frustration and fear. He told me he didn't know what to do. He didn't tell me he respected me. He didn't tell me he wanted to change his life. He simply said, "Diane, I need work." I could have told him the truth right there, that I owned a company, that I had a position open, and that I could help him. But I knew my brother. If I told him I was the owner, he would never take the job. Or worse, he would take it while acting like he was above everyone. So I made a quiet decision. I called one of my managers, a dependable man named Ethan Fairchild, and arranged everything without revealing my identity to Caleb. The next week, Caleb was hired as a junior operations assistant at $27 an hour, a generous wage for someone with no degree and no recent work experience. He never knew the job came from me. He never knew that every time he stepped into that office in Portwell, he was walking into a company born from my sweat and sacrifice. He never knew that the paycheck he relied on was signed by my hand. And he definitely never knew how many times Ethan reported to me about his behavior, his progress, or his constant complaints about his poor adopted sister. Sometimes the reports made me laugh, sometimes they made me shake my head. But I never confronted him. I wanted him to grow on his own, not because I pushed him. And then there was Marissa. She joined Brightleaf Consulting about 8 months after Caleb did, working in a different department under one of our project leaders. From the very first day, she treated me with respect, not because I was the owner, but because she was simply that kind of person. She worked hard, listened carefully, and always offered help when she could. When she eventually started dating Caleb, she came to me privately to tell me. She didn't need my permission, of course, but she said she wanted to be honest with me. That moment told me more about her character than anything else could have. Over the months that followed, she confided in me quietly. She never said anything cruel, but she did mention how Caleb occasionally spoke about me, calling me the adopted one, the quiet one, or the one who always needs help. She never liked hearing those things, but she also didn't want to ruin their relationship by arguing about me every time he said something ignorant. So she kept her peace. Until the wedding. Until the moment he humiliated me publicly. Until she realized the man she loved wasn't the man she thought he was. And while everyone else saw a ruined wedding, Marissa saw something different. She saw the truth he had tried to hide. She saw the person I truly was. And she refused to let him stand on my dignity. Standing in that garden, watching the engagement fall apart, I realized something else too. The truth I had hidden for years was no longer going to stay in the shadows. My brother thought he knew me, but he had no idea who I had become. And soon, he would learn everything he had never bothered to ask. For a long moment after Marissa placed the engagement ring into Caleb's hand, the world around us felt strangely hollow. It was as if every sound, every breath, every rustle of fabric, every whispered conversation was being swallowed by the weight of what had just happened. The sunlight still shone across the garden, warm and golden, but there was nothing warm about the atmosphere anymore. The beauty of the place, the ivory roses, the carved stone pathway, the delicate decorations that had been arranged for months, all of it seemed out of place. A wedding without joy becomes nothing more than decoration over truth. Marissa stood tall, though I could tell she was shaking inside. Her white heels trembled slightly on the stone floor, the same floor that had been meant to welcome her into a new life. Instead, it carried her away from a man she no longer believed in. Her parents watched her with stunned expressions, their pride replaced by disbelief. A few moments earlier, they had been laughing and celebrating like any parents would at a wedding. Now they watched their daughter walk away from the future they had imagined for her. But before she left the archway completely, she turned and walked straight toward me. Each step she took echoed sharply, like the sound of honesty cracking through a lie. Her face was flushed with anger, but not at me, at what had been said about me. When she stopped in front of me, her voice softened in a way that almost broke me. "Diane," she said gently, "you don't deserve this. You've helped so many people, including your brother. I'm sorry." Her apology made something inside me twist. After everything that had happened, she was the one apologizing. For a moment, I couldn't find my voice. All I could do was look at her, this woman who had just shattered her own wedding rather than allow disrespect to continue. I had always admired her strength, but in that moment, I realized it was deeper than I ever knew. Caleb must have felt the situation slipping through his fingers, because he suddenly grabbed her arm. Not roughly, not violently, but desperately, like a drowning man reaching for anything to pull him back to safety. "Marissa, wait," he cried. "Don't end this because of her. Because of her." That was when the last piece of the lie fell apart. Marissa's expression hardened instantly. Her eyes, which had been soft just moments earlier, turned cold and sharp, like ice forming over water. She pulled her arm from his grip, as if his touch burned. "Because of her?" she repeated slowly, her voice like a blade.
"She's your boss, Caleb."
"She's the woman who gave you a job when you had nothing. She made sure you could pay your rent, your bills, your food. She helped you build a life you didn't bother appreciating. And you humiliated her today. I'm done, Caleb. This wedding is over." Caleb's entire body seemed to collapse inward, as if her words knocked the breath out of him. He looked down at the engagement ring now sitting cold in his hand. It should have been a symbol of love, of hope, a connection between two people beginning a new life. But in that moment, it looked like nothing more than a shiny reminder of his own cruelty. All around us, the guests stood frozen. Some whispered behind their hands. Some shook their heads. Some looked away, embarrassed to have witnessed such an intimate truth unfold in public. Even the violinist, who had been playing a soft melody earlier, had stopped completely, bow hovering in midair as if afraid to move. Marissa's parents approached her, placing gentle hands on her shoulders, guiding her away. They didn't protest her decision. They didn't scold her. They simply recognized the strength it took to stand up for what was right, even when it meant walking away from a moment they had dreamed about for years. Then Marissa turned back to me one last time. "You don't need to stay here, Diane," she said. "Let's go." Her invitation was kind, but I didn't accept it. I rooted myself where I stood, not out of stubbornness, but because I had something left to say. Words I had carried for years, but never found the courage to speak out loud. "I'm not leaving yet," I told her quietly. Caleb looked up slowly, his eyes wide and full of confusion. Maybe he expected me to protect him. Maybe he thought after everything I had done for him, I would step in and defend him. But he didn't understand. He had never understood. I stepped forward, just enough that he could not avoid my gaze. "Caleb," I began, my voice calm, almost too calm for the storm inside me. "I would have given you everything.
A job. A home.
A family. I supported you when no one else could. But today, you took something I never gave you permission to touch." His breath hitched slightly. "Diane," he whispered. "You took my dignity," I said. "And that is something I will never allow anyone to take again." He stood there silent, as if each word had sunk into him like heavy stones. His suit, once neat and proud, now looked wrinkled and helpless. The confident man who earlier laughed with guests was gone. In his place stood someone small, someone exposed, someone who finally saw the consequences of his thoughtless cruelty. Guests began drifting away in slow groups, murmuring to each other, avoiding eye contact. Some glanced at me sympathetically, but none approached. Maybe they were ashamed, or maybe they simply didn't know how to handle truth laid bare in the middle of a wedding aisle. The celebration, the ceremony, the music, the speeches, all of it dissolved like mist. Nothing remained but silence and the sound of people walking away, their footsteps trailing off into the distance. And the wedding that should have been full of joy and promise ended before it even began. But for me, something else began that day. A shift. A realization. A turning point. The moment I saw my brother's mask fall away, I finally understood that the truth, no matter how painful, was always better than silence. And I knew that the next chapter of my life was waiting for me just beyond that broken archway. 2 days passed after the ruined wedding, and both days felt strangely quiet, like life was holding its breath. Lincoln Springs is usually peaceful, but this was a different kind of silence. It followed me through every room of my house, wrapped around me at night, and sat with me at my breakfast table each morning. I had a small white house with a porch swing, the first home I ever bought with my own money, $52,000 from a contract I once worked hard to win. That house represented everything I built on my own, everything the world thought I couldn't do. It was my space, my history, and my safety. I hoped those 2 days would be enough for things to settle inside me, but the hurt from the wedding didn't fade. It lingered like a bruise under the skin. On the third morning, while I was watering the flowers on my porch, I heard slow footsteps coming up the gravel road. I didn't turn immediately. A part of me already knew who it was. When the footsteps stopped at my gate, I finally lifted my eyes, and there he stood, Caleb, my brother, with a bunch of wilted flowers in his hands and a face full of regret. The flowers looked like they had been bought without thought and carried around too long, their petals sagging as if they shared his shame. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The breeze rustled through the leaves above us, and a distant car hummed on the main road. Everything around us felt too calm for the storm sitting between us. He stepped forward slowly. "Diane," he said, his voice cracking at the edges. "I'm sorry. I didn't move. I only watched him. I wanted to see if he truly meant those words, or if they were just another quick patch he hoped would fix everything without effort." He swallowed hard before continuing.
"I was stupid," he said.
"I didn't mean what I said at the wedding. I shouldn't have joked like that. I don't know what I was thinking. Please forgive me." His voice trembled as he spoke, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. But then the memory of his laughter at the wedding hit me again, the carefree, cruel sound of it, the way he pointed at me as if I were nothing more than a story to mock. And all the years of quiet patience I had given him came rushing back. I had protected him when our parents argued. I had helped him through school projects he procrastinated on. I had been there when he had no money, no stability, and no plan. And when he needed a job, I gave him one without telling him it was mine to give. But none of that mattered to him. Not enough to treat me with basic respect. I placed the watering can down gently on the porch railing. "Caleb," I said, my voice calm but steady, "you showed me exactly who you are when you said those words." He blinked rapidly, as if hoping tears would soften my heart. "I didn't know you were the owner of that company," he said, as though that detail excused everything. "If I had known—" "That's the problem," I cut in gently. "You never tried to know me." My words hit him harder than anything else could have. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He had expected anger, maybe yelling, maybe tears. But not calm, not truth. Truth is heavier than anger. Truth doesn't need to raise its voice. He looked down at the flowers in his hands, almost embarrassed by them. I don't want to lose you," he whispered. I felt something twist inside me, not pain, but realization. For years I had been the one holding our connection together, the one reaching out, the one forgiving and forgetting. But a relationship held by only one person doesn't last. It only stretches until it finally snaps. "Caleb," I said, softer this time, "you lost me the moment you decided my value depended on what you believed I was, not who I truly am." He finally looked up at me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw him as a man, not as my older brother. A flawed man who had lived too long believing others would clean up his mistakes. A man who had leaned on my strength without ever trying to build his own. "Can't we start over?" he asked, his voice barely audible. I exhaled slowly. "Not right now." Then I shook my head. "Maybe not ever." His shoulders sagged. He seemed to shrink where he stood, shrinking into someone who finally understood what loss felt like. Not the kind of loss you cry about for an hour and recover from. The kind of loss that lingered, teaching lessons too late. I stepped back inside my doorway, holding the screen door with one hand. He took a small step forward, as if he hoped I might change my mind in one final moment of weakness. But I didn't. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't say anything cruel. I simply said, "Goodbye, Caleb," and gently closed the door. The click of the latch felt heavier than any shout. It was the sound of a boundary finally being drawn. Inside my house, I pressed my back against the door, letting the silence settle around me. My heart beat fast, not with sorrow, but with something else, something unfamiliar but strong. It was the feeling of choosing myself. I moved slowly through my living room, letting my fingers trail over the bookshelves, the framed photographs, the small glass trinkets I'd collected from trips to places like Newcastle in England or Savannah in Georgia, little reminders of the world beyond my past. Every object seemed to whisper that I had a life worth living, worth protecting. A life I had built brick by brick, dollar by dollar, lesson by lesson. That night, as I sat on my porch swing with a cup of mint tea, I watched the sunset spill orange light across the sky. The town was peaceful, children on bicycles in the distance, neighbors grilling dinner, dogs barking softly from porches. Everything looked ordinary, but my heart felt different, lighter, stronger, clearer. For the first time in my life, I understood the difference between forgiveness and freedom. Forgiveness was something I could offer quietly in my heart one day, maybe. But freedom was something I was claiming now. The wedding had ended. My bond with Caleb had changed forever. But my story was just beginning.